You know, what is it that makes one corporate giant last for a century, while another one, just as powerful, just vanishes? It's a wild story of adaptation, of power, and, well, the catastrophic failure to see what's right in front of you. So, let's get into it.
I mean, that's really the big question, isn't it? The line between becoming a household name, like Samsung, and becoming a total cautionary tale like US Steel, it is way, way finer than you'd think. And today, we're going to walk right along that line.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at some true titans of industry, see how they adapted to win, what the real price of power is, what happens when you just fail to change, and we'll wrap up with something I call the leader's paradox.
So first up, titans of industry. Let's meet our 4 giants. Each one has a critical lesson for us about what it takes to survive, and of course, what happens when you just don't. Okay, so here's our lineup. We've got Samsung, the absolute master of reinvention. Then there's Goldman Sachs, the ultimate survivor no matter what. US Steel, the classic fallen giant. And finally, General Electric, or GE, a company whose legacy, well, people are still fighting about it. And when you put them all together, they create this incredible puzzle of what it takes to win and what it really costs to lose.
So let's kick things off with how to adapt and win. And there's no better story than Samsung's. It's maybe the most stunning example of a company completely changing its stripes in modern history.
I mean, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the sheer scale of Samsung's transformation. They didn't just, evolve. They completely reinvented themselves over and over again. Think about this. In 1938, they were a grocery trader selling dried fish. Fast forward, and they're building the world's biggest ships and, yeah, the phone that's probably in your pocket right now. This wasn't just a business plan. It was a survival strategy that was tied to the fate of an entire country.
So the big question is, how on earth did they pull that off? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is this concept called the chaebol. See, after the Korean War, the South Korean government basically went all in on supporting these massive, family-run conglomerates. They protected them from competition, threw financing at them, all to rebuild the country. Samsung wasn't just growing in a strong economy. For a while, it pretty much was the economy.
And really, this adapt or die philosophy, it came straight from the founder, Lee Byung-chul. He grew up while Japan was occupying Korea, and he learned a really simple, really brutal lesson. You either adapt to the new reality or you get crushed. He took that lesson and applied it to every single thing his business did, and ended up creating one of the biggest companies on the entire planet. Okay, so that's one way to adapt. But now let's look at a totally different kind of adaptation. We're talking about Goldman Sachs. They survived, for sure, but their story shows us let's say, a darker side of the corporate life cycle. This is where survival isn't about new products, it's about wielding power and influence.
So if you look at their pitch, Goldman Sachs is all about putting clients first. It's this humble story of a German immigrant's dream. But the reality of their history is a story of surviving one market crash after another, usually surrounded by controversy. I mean, from allegations of insider trading way back in 1929, all the way up to the 2008 financial crisis, the firm has always found a way to bounce back, often with a little help from their friends in Washington.
And this quote from a whistleblower, wow, it gives you a pretty shocking glimpse into the internal culture that critics always talk about. So while the official line was always client first, behind closed doors, it sounds like a very different game was being played. A game where, profit was the only thing that really mattered.
And that right there reveals Goldman's real secret to adaptation. It wasn't about products, it was about power. They mastered that revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. And in doing so, they made themselves absolutely essential to the entire system. So when a crisis hit, Goldman wasn't just another bank. It was indispensable. It became, quite literally, too big to fail.
All right, so we've gone from a company that adapted almost too well to one that, well, failed to adapt at all. This next one, US Steel, is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a giant gets lazy and comfortable.
Now, to really get the scale of this fall, you first have to appreciate the insane heights they reached. We're talking about a company formed by legends like J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie. It was America's first ever billion-dollar company. At its peak, it controlled 67%. That's 2/3 of the entire American steel market. It was so big, Wall Street just called it the corporation. That was it.
But that's the thing about being on top, right? That dominance, it bred complacency. While all these international competitors were innovating like crazy, US Steel just stuck with what it knew. And the perfect example of this is something called the basic oxygen furnace. This was a revolutionary piece of tech. It was cheaper, way more efficient than the old Bessemer converters US Steel was still using. But the giant was just too slow, too invested in its old ways to make the switch.
And by the 1960s, the consequences were becoming crystal clear. You look at Japan, 55% of their steel was being made with this new technology. The United States, a measly 17%. The company that practically invented the industry was being left in the dust. Apparently, the fat cats at the top were just enjoying the profits, thinking their head start would last forever. They were dead wrong.
In the end of this story is just, oh, the irony is thick. In 2023, the ultimate symbol of American industrial might, the company that fell behind its Japanese rivals, agreed to be bought by one of those rivals, Nippon Steel. I mean, that is the ultimate price you pay for refusing to adapt.
And that brings us to our final story, which might be the most complex of them all. We're talking about General Electric, specifically under its legendary CEO, Jack Welch. Because this story has everything. Brilliant adaptation, the ruthless use of power, and, in the end, a kind of failure that would unravel the company for decades.
Yeah, you don't get a nickname like Neutron Jack for nothing. The name came from his ability to wipe out the employees while leaving the building standing. His whole management philosophy was radical, and he was totally unapologetic about it. He believed in aggressive simplification and consolidation, which, in plain English, meant firing a lot of people to cut costs and crank up profits. And his most famous and infamous innovation was this system called the vitality curve, but everyone else called it rank and yank. Here's how it worked. Every single year, managers had to sort their employees. The top 20% were the A players. They got all the rewards. The middle 70% were the B players, told to get better. And the bottom 10%, the C players, they were fired. Every year, no exceptions. It created this unbelievably intense, cutthroat culture. And the results of all this is the paradox. They were spectacular, and at the same time, disastrous. On the one hand, under Welch, GE stock value went through the roof. The profits were record-breaking. He was treated like a management god, but he did it by shifting the company's focus from making things to risky financial services. He created a culture that was totally obsessed with short-term thinking. So the very same strategies that made him a superstar were planting the seeds for GE's eventual spectacular collapse.
But here's the thing. This story doesn't just end with G.E. Welch's philosophy got so popular that it basically became the playbook for corporate America. Hundreds of companies, including huge names like Microsoft and Amazon, adopted their own versions of rank and yank. His ideas didn't just change one company, they fundamentally reshaped the whole relationship between employers and employees in the U.S.
So all of this leaves us with one last really crucial question. When you look at these four giants, you have to ask, what is a corporation even for? Is its ultimate goal just short-term shareholder value, a machine for printing money right now, like Jack Welch's GE? Or is it more like a living organism built for long-term resilience and innovation, like Samsung? The answer to that question, well, it doesn't just define the fate of a company. It pretty much defines the world that all of us work in.